And let's probably start. So my name is Alex Terentiev, and welcome to the session Create Beautiful SPFX Web Part in Minutes using PnP Reusable Controls. First of all, thanks to all our sponsors that made this event free for you and possible at all. A few words about myself. I'm an Office Development MVP, Microsoft 365 PnP team member. I'm a solutions architect at SharePoint at least and have more than 10 years of experience with SharePoint and front-end development. But more important, of course, is social media. So follow me on Twitter, visit my GitHub profile, read my blog, and feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Today's agenda. First, we will go through SharePoint Framework overview. Then we will go through Microsoft 365 PnP overview. And we will code. We will create a beautiful web part using PnP Reusable Controls. And I will try to do everything really fast because we don't have too much time. It's only 30-35 minutes. So let's start with the first topic, SharePoint Framework overview. So what is SharePoint Framework? The SharePoint Framework is a modern way to develop SharePoint customizations. It's client-side, it's modern, it's mobile first, it's framework agnostic, meaning that you can use any front-end, TypeScript, JavaScript framework you like, and it's based on commonly used web development tools. And the last part can be kind of a headache for classic SharePoint developers because we are not in the .NET world anymore, we are in a front-end world, but all the tools are pretty similar to what we had in C# world, and I'll show you it in a minute. One more thing to mention about SharePoint Framework is that first-party components are developed using SharePoint Framework as well, and it kind of makes SharePoint Framework a unique development tool because first-party developers and third-party developers are in the same boat. And let's talk a little bit more about these development tools, development tool chain. So as I said, we are not in the .NET world anymore. We are in the front-end world, but all these tools have the same like features or functions as we had tools in .NET world, and I'll show you it right now. So the first tool is Node.js, and Node.js is just a hosting and serving environment for your JavaScript projects, and it's pretty similar to IIS Express in .NET world. The next one is NPM. NPM is a package manager that allows you to reference or include external modules, external libraries into your projects, and it's pretty similar to NuGet package manager in .NET world. Next tool is Webpack. Webpack is a modules transformer, bundler, and packager that collects different assets from your projects, transform them somehow creates chunks that will be loaded to the page. Gulp is an extendable task runner that allows you to create custom routines based on tasks. And for example, in SharePoint Framework, build routine is based on Gulp tasks. And you can actually even create your own custom tasks and inject them in SPFX build routine as well. And if you look at Webpack and Gulp together, they are pretty similar to MS Build in .NET world. Next tool is Yeoman, and Yeoman is a templates engine with generators ecosystem, and you can think of generator as a conditional template. So when you start a generator, it will probably ask user or developer few questions, and then based on the answers, it will scaffold the project for you. And yes, Yeoman is pretty similar to Visual Studio templates in .NET world. And the last tool is TypeScript. TypeScript is a language. It's a type superset of JavaScript that compiles into plain JavaScript, but it brings you all the goodness like classes, interfaces, enums, and so on and so forth, all that types that are not available in plain JavaScript. So as you can see, there are a lot of tools, and if you are new to SharePoint Framework development or you're new to web development, all these tools are new for you, right? And you can ask like, wow, what should I learn first, right? So I would say that you should be good with TypeScript for sure, because it's a language you will use on day-to-day basis. And if you are fluent in a language, it's pretty good for you because you can achieve your goals faster. And you also should be familiar with the NPM, maybe not with NPM itself, but with the modules that are available in NPM repository, because most probably you don't want to invent the wheel, but instead of that, you would probably use some libraries or modules that are available in there. All other tools are not so important. You just need to know few commands to start your project, to scaffold your project, and for most scenarios, like 90% scenarios, especially inside SharePoint Framework, you're good to go. All right, so what is available in SharePoint Frameworks? First of all, client-side web parts, and if you are familiar with ASP.NET web parts, the idea here is the same. Web part is some component that can be added to page and usually solve some business problem. Good thing about SharePoint Framework web parts that they're available both on classic and modern SharePoint pages, and they're available in SharePoint 2016, 2019, and SharePoint Online. Next available thing is extensions, and extensions allow you to extend or customize modern SharePoint UI and behavior. And currently there are 4 types of extensions available. The first one is Application Customizer. Application Customizer allows you to add a custom header and footer to your page, or you can also use it to inject custom JavaScript or custom CSS to the page as well. Next type of customizer is Command Set Customizer. It allows you to add custom buttons to list command bar and also to list item context menu. Next one is Field Customizer. It allows you to provide custom rendering for list columns. And the last one is Search Query Modifier that allows you to modify or extend the search query before it actually sent to the server for processing. And here on this screenshot, the example on this screenshot shows that user typed meeting in a search box, and before sending it to the server, we translated it using Azure Cognitive Services to Turkish and Spanish. And as a result, we got documents for all 3 languages instead of just English. So you can use it with some rich scenarios for the search as well. Another tool available, or another type of project available in SharePoint Framework, is library components. And you can think of library components as reusable SharePoint Framework solutions that can be separately deployed to your tenant app catalog. And later you can link or reference these library components in any other SharePoint Framework solution on your tenant. So basically, if you have some common components, common controls, common business logic that should be shared between your different SPFX solutions, you can create a library component, deploy it separately to app catalog, and then reuse in any other of your SPFX solutions. Minimal path to awesome. So what should you do to create your SharePoint Framework project? First, you need to install Node.js and NPM to your machine. And small remark that currently SPFX supports Node.js 8 and 10, and it should be fixed soon, because I believe for Node.js latest version is 14 right now. So it's kind of overdue for SharePoint to update the support, but it should happen soon. Next one, you need to install IDE, and there is no specific requirement or specific IDE you need to install. You can use any IDE you prefer. Probably the kind of requirement for IDE is support of front-end development, like syntax highlighting, IntelliSense for TypeScript, for CSS. I prefer Visual Studio Code because it's free. It was originally created for front-end development. And if you look at different demos around SharePoint Framework, all of them are demonstrated using Visual Studio Code. So even if you prefer some other IDE, it's good to be familiar with Visual Studio Code as well. Next, we need to install Yeoman and Gulp to our machine, and this is done using npm, and the command is npm i-g yo gulp, where I is a shortcut for install. -g parameter shows that we are installing these modules globally, and they will be available in any folder on your machine. Yo is a shortcut for Yeoman, and gulp is gulp. Then, in the same way, we are installing a Yeoman SharePoint generator. The command is npm i-g at Microsoft/generator SharePoint. Again, we are installing it globally, and it will be available everywhere on your machine. When this is done, we can navigate to the folder where we want to create our SPFX solution and scaffold our project using Yeoman. So the command is yo at Microsoft/SharePoint, and the generator will ask you the name of the solution, if you want to create a web part, extension, library component, what is the name of web part, do you want to use React or no, and so on and so forth. And after you answer all these questions, it will scaffold Hello World SPFX project for you. If you are creating the first ever SharePoint Framework solution on this specific machine, you need to trust self-signed developer certificate. It's done only once, and it's done using gulp trustDevCert command. It will actually allow you to debug your SharePoint Framework solutions locally on your machine. And when all is done, the last step is to actually run your project. And this is done using gulp serve command. This will launch local server for you. It will also open default browser. And in this browser, it will open so-called workbench page, where you can add your web part and play with it, even without connection to Office 365 tenant. All right, and that is the overview of SharePoint Framework. Now, quick overview of Microsoft 365 PnP initiative. So Microsoft 365 PnP is an open source initiative that is created by Microsoft Engineering. And initially, it was created to simplify life of developers, of admins, of end users, and to share some common scenarios, some common code, some best practices with the community. And now, if you think about Microsoft 365 PnP, it's not only code or it's not only documents, it's different developer videos, different community videos. There are a bunch of different open source projects. There are a bunch of different sample galleries. As you can see on this slide, for example, there are web parts, SPFX web parts samples, SPFX extension samples, list formatting samples, team samples, and so on and so forth. There are also a lot of different initiatives inside Microsoft 365 PnP, for example, Microsoft 365 CLI, PnP PowerShell, and so on and so forth. And the only URL you should remember for the Microsoft 365 PnP is aka.ms/m365pnp. It's an entry point to all the resources that PnP currently provides to you. But today, during this session, we will focus on PnP Reusable Controls. And there are two libraries or two repositories for reusable controls. The first one is PnP React Controls that provides a set of reusable controls to build SharePoint Framework web parts and extensions. And the second library or second repository is PnP Property Pane Controls that provides a set of controls to build property panes for your web parts. And actually, let's switch to code and create some web parts using these reusable controls. So what we will be creating? Let's assume that you have a requirement to create a carousel web part that will show some carousel of images with some even additional information like some description, some title, and you should be able to configure this web part dynamically to select a specific document library from some site collection on your tenant. So you don't know at the moment of development from where you will be grabbing or requesting your images. Okay, so if you think about this task and you're not familiar with reusable controls, it might take much time to implement everything, right? Because you need a carousel, you need some web part title, you need to implement a selection of sites, selection of lists in your property pane. But fortunately, all these components are available in PnP repositories. So to implement this web part, we will be using carousel, placeholder and web part title from React controls, and site picker and list picker from property controls. So carousel is basically to display the carousel. Web part title allows you to display web part title similarly to out-of-the-box web parts. And placeholder is a great control that allows you to display kind of placeholder instead of your web part to show like, hey, your web part is not configured. Please go to property pane to configure it first. And before switching to actual code, let me show you some documentation around these PnP reusable controls. So there are two repositories and two types of documentation. The first one for React controls. As you can see, there are a lot of information on how to install the controls, what is the version, what are the available controls. And if you go to the navigation and go to controls, you will see the list of all these controls available for you. And let's navigate, for example, into carousel. You will see how the control looks, how to import the control from the library, how you can use this control with different scenarios, all the properties that are available for the configuration, and so on and so forth. Same, for example, if we navigate to the placeholder, again, you see how it looks, you see how to import it, you see how to use it, and even for placeholder, it shows you how to implement on configure handler to open property pane inside your web part. And the same for property pane control, same home page, how to install, what is available. And again, here we have controls section where you can see all the controls. And if we navigate, for example, to our list picker that we will be using, again, you can see how it looks. You can see how to import it from the library, how to configure it, and so on and so forth. Okay, so, and let me show you also the document library from where we will be getting the data for our carousel. So currently it contains 3 images. It also contains some title, some description that we also want to show on kind of black information when you hover over our carousel. And it also contains even URL that you probably want to use as well. When, for example, you're clicking on your carousel, you want to be redirected to a specific URL. So now let me switch to the code. And currently I just have the scaffolded web part without any changes. So this one was created by just using human generator. The only change that I have already done, because we don't have a lot of time, so I have already installed PnP Reusable Controls to my solution, because it usually takes a lot of time to just install these modules in your web parts. And now let's modify our code to first of all, request information from the document library, and then display the carousel. And first thing we need to modify is we need to modify the properties of our component, because we don't need to display some description. Instead of that, we want to display some images. And for that, I will copy, because we don't have too much time. I will be copying. I love light coding, but because of the 35-minute session, I don't have time for that, unfortunately. So these are new properties that we will have in our web part. Site URL, list ID, and SP HTTP client are needed to request data from specific document library. Title, display mode, and update title are needed to use web part title component. So basically it will display what we have in title. Display mode is needed to display either input to modify the title or just read-only title. And update title is a handler to handle that the title of our web part has been changed. And on configure, handler is needed for our placeholder component to handle click on the button inside the component. And I also need to add a few imports in here for the display mode and SharePoint client. Okay, now let's go to our web part and modify the web part. First of all, we need to modify properties of our web part as well, because we don't want to configure the description. We need to store site, we need to store list ID, and we need to store title. And before doing that, again, I need some imports from our PnP property pane controls. So I'm importing site picker and list picker to add them to our property pane. And also I'm importing iProperty field site interface that will be used to store selected sites in our properties. Okay, so now let's go here and update properties of our web part. So we are storing sites. As you can see, it's an array, but we actually will be storing only single site because site picker allows you to have multi-selection, but in our case, it will be single selection. List ID is to store the ID of the document library from where we'll be requesting data, and title is for title. Okay, now we can change the property pane. So again, let me copy it, and I will go here. Here is our get property pane configuration method. And currently, again, we have out of the box method here to display the input text field. So I will paste the site picker and list picker. And as you can see, configuration for standard out-of-the-box components is pretty similar to PnP components. We need to provide target property first, and then we need to provide an object with some configuration for this or that property pane control. So I will remove text field. And let's go through the site picker and list picker configuration. So for site picker, we are providing context of our web part, properties, some label. We are providing handler for property change event. We are setting multi-select to false because we want to select only single site. Initial site is what has been previously selected for our component, and a key. Similarly to list picker, again, we have context, we have properties on property change. Also, interesting one is disabled. So disabled in our case, we are checking if the site has been selected, right? So we don't want to be able to select any list if we didn't select site previously, right? And web absolute URL property of list picker allows you to provide specific URL from where you want to get the lists. And additional property is base template that allows you to filter lists. And 101 parameter here shows that we want to display only document libraries. So it means that in the dropdown for list picker, we won't see any list. We will not see any assets, but we will see only document libraries and libraries or your custom libraries that are extended from default document library as well. So when this is done, we can change our render method, because right now we were providing description and we changed the properties of our control. Again, I will be copying some code. Here we go. So here we are providing site URL based on our properties, list ID based on properties, title based on properties. Display mode is available in our web part class. On configure, in that case, as we saw in documentation, we just want to open the property pane. For update title, again, we are just setting new title to our properties. And SP HTTP client is available in the context of our web part. Cool. Now we can navigate to our component and start changing it. And first thing I want to do here, I want to define additional interface that will be used to request data from the document library, not to request data, but to provide typing to the requested data. So as you remember, and I'll show you in it again, so we have the some URL to our file, we have title, we have description, and we have URL to be opened when we click on carousel. So basically, this interface provides these properties that we can reference later on. We have image source, we have title, description, and URL. Another thing that I will implement the state for our component. And the only property inside this state will be images, and it will be of type iCarousel image. And I need to change the definition of our component and also provide custom constructor here. Oops, not state, but props to set default state to empty object. Okay, so next part to implement in our component, we need to request data from document library. For these purposes, I will implement get images method. Let me again copy it and we will go through it. So here it is. It's based on props or properties of our component. If site URL is not defined or list ID is not defined, in that case, we can't get any information from the document library because we don't know what is the document library. Otherwise, we are using a SPHTTP client to do a SharePoint REST API request, and we are using site URL to go to a specific site. We are getting list by ID, we are getting items, and we're expanding file to get file server relative URL for it. And we are reading the response as a JSON, and if there are any items returned, in that case, we will just iterate through them and push data to our images array, and then set these images to our state. And I need to add import for SPHTTP client here. So it should be import from Microsoft SPHTTP. Okay, so this method will be called twice in two situations. The first one is when we just added our web part to the page, and the second when the properties are changed. So this is done using component did mount, and component will receive properties. And in this component will receive props if list ID has been changed or site URL has been changed. In that case, we need to re-request the data. Okay, so when this is done, we can actually start changing the render method. And first thing I want to do in the render method, I want to destructure the props. If you're not familiar with destructing the object, basically we can use this notification, this definition, to provide variables for each and every properties inside our object. And after that, instead of typing like this .props.site URL, we can just use site URL, list ID, title, and so on and so forth. Okay, so in our render, first thing we want to add the web part title. Here it is. And we are providing display mode, we are providing title, we are providing update property, and again, I need to add an import here. So we will import web part title from PnP Controls React lib web part title. And I will do the same for placeholder and carousel that we'll be using from PnP SPFX Controls React lib placeholder, and import carousel from PnP SPFX Controls React lib carousel. Okay, so we have web part title. Next thing we will add is placeholder. And again, I will copy it here. So we are showing placeholder only in the situation if site URL or list ID are not defined. So in that case, it means that we can't request data from document library and we need to configure our web part. And we are providing some properties here, like icon name, what icon to display, what text to display near the icon, additional description, some button label, and our own configure handler to open property pane. Okay, this part is done as well. And the last part is to actually get carousel or main content of our web part. And for these purposes, I will have separate method in here, get main content. And we are checking if we have images already. In that case, we can display the carousel. Otherwise, we will display spinner. And spinner is a component that is available in Office UI Fabric React that you can also reuse in your document in your web parts. Okay, and here for carousel, as you can see, if we look at element, property of the carousel, there are different scenarios how you can use it. You can provide either React element or array of React elements or array of interfaces of iCarousel image props. We will use the last one. In that case, we just need to provide some properties for each and every image that we want to show. And let me show you this interface. So again, it has image source, URL, title, description. So pretty similar to what we had in our custom interface when we're getting information from SharePoint list. And it has a bunch of other parameters that you can use to customize the look and feel of your carousel image. Okay, so there are some additional parameters inside the carousel that you can use. For example, how you want to show the next and pref button. Do you want an infinite animation or no? What is the indicator style? You can provide some handlers for move next and move pref click. Do you want to pause when you hover over your carousel, and so on and so forth. Okay, and now we can use this get main content in our render method if both site URL and list ID are defined. In that case, we are rendering our main content, and I need to add this in here. Okay. And the last thing we need to do, we need to change our CSS styles a little bit, because by default, carousel doesn't know what is the height of your web part. So you should define what is the height of the carousel content would be. For these purposes, we can add additional style, for example, carousel image content. And if we go back to our where is my pointer? Oh, here it is. We can go back to the our definition for carousel, and here we can provide these content container styles, and this is our class. In that case, the content of our carousel will be 400 pixels. Okay, so it looks like everything is implemented, and I can start my SharePoint Framework project, and I'm using no browser here because I already opened the browser. So let's see if we have any errors. Hopefully not, because we don't have a lot of time. And there are no errors. Cool. So let me go back, and I have SharePoint hosted workbench opened here. I will refresh it. And I will add our PnP carousel demo web part. Here is our web part title, so I can provide something like awesome carousel in here. This is our placeholder. If I click on configure, it opens the property pane. I will search for our PnP sandbox team site. From our list picker, I will select carousel. Voila, our component is configured now, and as you can see, there is additional information from the document library. We have title, we have description, and if we click on it, it will open the URL from our document library in a separate tab. And basically, same functionality here on actual SharePoint page. You can see the same. So it's real carousel, and it took like, of course, I was copy pasting, but it took like 10 minutes to copy paste all the code. If you're not copy pasting, it would take about like 30 minutes for it. And you have a beautiful web part displayed on your SharePoint page. So let's quickly go back to our presentation. And some summary, some final thoughts. So when you're using PnP Reusable Controls, in most cases, you don't need to worry about the UI. You should be focused on your business logic mostly. All the components are easily referenced in the web part, and React, you just need to import the controls from the library, and you need to provide some required and optional properties to the controls. Most of the controls also have flexible configuration to fit different scenarios. For example, as for carousel, you saw that you can provide element as a React element, as an array of elements, or as an array of interfaces for different scenarios you might have. And most of the controls are also based on Fluent UI or Office UI Fabric UI, and it means that they fit seamlessly into modern SharePoint UI. Resources. So the first URL is the SharePoint Framework overview. The second one is entry point to all the Microsoft 365 PnP resources. Next two links are for the documentation around PnP React controls and PnP property pane controls. And the last URL is for the code from this session. And I'll definitely share the slides from this session after it in Twitter, and maybe there will be some location inside the event itself. And one thing I want to mention, so PnP is an open source initiative and contributions are always welcome. So if you find any issues, any bugs in documentation, in controls itself, or if you want to implement some new controls, some addition to the library, feel free to do that. Feel free to create a PR. Don't be afraid of that. We will help you if there are some issues. And yeah, just feel free to participate, to communicate to us, and to be part of this great community. And thank you for visiting this session. And we have 10 more minutes, I believe, for the questions, if we have any. Okay, package JSON. Show package JSON on the screen. Let me go here. So the web part itself is based on SharePoint Framework version 1.11, and Office UI Fabric React is currently 6.214. And for SPFX controls React 2.4, for SPFX property pane controls 2.3. And yes, in Git, the code is shared as well. Yeah, that's correct. But by the way, so all these dependencies, except of these two, these are default dependencies provided by SharePoint Framework itself. So even for Office UI Fabric React, technically, PnP controls can work with version 7, but because by default you have version 6, that's why we are not changing it. And currently it's said even in documentation that the controls are based on Office UI Fabric React version 6. All right. Are there any other questions? And I can go back to the slide with all the URLs. Here we go, if it will be easier. Feel free to ask any other questions if you have around Microsoft 365 PnP as well. So as I said, I'm part of core team. So yeah, if you have any questions in there, feel free to ask as well.
Thanks, Alex.
Seems like no questions. So Ryan, are we have a location where we can share the slide decks for now?
Yeah, just send them to me and we'll send it out to our registered attendees along with the recording.
Cool. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
All right then. So thank you for attending this session, and hopefully it was helpful for you, and have a great rest of your day. And there are a lot of sessions around the corner. So thank you very much for attending. Have a great day and happy Friday. Bye, everyone.